Whenever you think of the modern action game, a few faces might immediately spring to mind. There's the pizza-loving demon hunter, a cold and calculated ninja, and the ruthless god killer on a quest for vengeance. While this kind of action game was super prevalent back in the 2000s, around the 2010s, this style of game was sort of dying out as shooters dominated the market. If you think the oversaturation of open world games is bad now, then you should have been around when it seemed as though every other game releasing was some gritty first-person shooter with short campaigns and a tacked-on multiplayer mode. However, during those dark times, there was a beacon of hope. A company that was willing to go against the grain of current trends and craft something with deep mechanics, hard-as-nail gameplay, and a hell of a lot of personality. Bayonetta was developed by Platinum Games and released all the way back in 2009 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The main man behind this project is none other than Hideki Kamiya. While he's garnered himself a rather infamous reputation in recent years, this guy has always been an industry legend. He directed games like the original Resident Evil 2, Beautiful Joe, and of course, the original Devil May Cry. If the first DMC was the pioneer in the 3D action genre, then Bayonetta can be seen as a natural evolution of that original concept. These two games have a lot in common with each other, so much so that people like to view the Bayonetta games as sort of a sister series to Devil May Cry. Both are technical action games with a large emphasis on showing off your skills. While there is a lot that ultimately separates the two to create a distinct experience, it's not hard to see that these two titles were cut from the same cloth. The Bayonetta series has currently spawned 3 main titles and 1 spin-off entry. This series has evolved a lot over the years, so much so that the original game stands out as an anomaly when stacked side by side with the sequels. As a result, this game isn't talked about as much outside of the hardcore sphere, which is a shame because Bayonetta 1, despite its faults, is a game that has a whole lot to offer. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the original Bayonetta 15 years later. But first, I'd like to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is the latest entry in the Yakuza franchise. The game features a strategic and refined turn-based combat system with plenty of depth on offer. Hit the beaches of Hawaii and partake in some of the fun and wacky activities that the Yakuza franchise is known for, and experience a gripping and emotional tale that sees 2 legendary heroes teaming up in an adventure that spans across the Pacific. So, let's hear from today's sponsor.
Welcome to paradise.
Aloha! All right!
I can show you around now. But there's a few things you need to learn before we have a good time.
You can have a little fun with some friends. And even pick up a new skill. Whatever you do, be careful. Even paradise can have its secrets.
You trying to tell me there are Yakuza in Hawaii? Not exactly something you'd find in a guidebook, is it?
Keep your friends close. And your enemies closer.
Name's Dwight.
Nice to meet you.
Take cover!
Long ago, there existed 2 clans, the Lumen Sages and the Umbra Witches. These 2 clans exist to keep balance in the world with these mystical artifacts known as the Eyes of the World. The Sages protect the right eye of light, with the Witches holding onto the left eye of darkness. For many years, these 2 clans lived in harmony. However, this all changed when a Lumen Sage and an Umbran Witch got together and had a child. Due to their mixed heritage, this child would be able to obtain both Eyes of the World, and as a result, would summon the creator Jubileus, who has the potential to destroy the entire world. While the Sages were more than happy to welcome Jubileus, the Witches weren't exactly on board with the idea. This tension eventually resulted in an all-out war between the 2 clans, which ends with nearly half of the Lumen Sages being annihilated, and our protagonist being sealed away for over 500 years. The protagonist of this story is the amnesiac Umbran witch named Bayonetta. About 20 years ago, she was found in a coffin at the bottom of a lake. Without any memories of her past, she ends up taking shady jobs from the underworld Inferno. You know how Dante from DMC is a devil hunter? Think of Bayonetta like an angel hunter of sorts. She punishes the divine not just for a paycheck, rather it's so that she can slowly unravel the truth of her past. Bayo's latest gig is going to take her to the fictitious Vigrid, a small nation in Europe, so she can find the other half of the eyes of the world. While Bayonetta mostly takes up this job for her own desire to learn more about herself, little does she know the conflict that she's about to get herself wrapped up in. That's basically all you need to know about the premise of Bayonetta, and if it were left like that, then it would be some pretty standard stuff for an action game. But the thing about Bayonetta's narrative is that it tries to have more depth than the average game in the genre. The keyword here being tries, because for how much emphasis ends up getting placed on the story, it's ultimately kind of shallow. A lot happens in Bayonetta's story, arguably too much for a title that's meant to establish the world and characters. We're introduced to Bayonetta and given her primary motivation. There's this mysterious woman named Jeanne who shows up from time to time, teasing a budding rivalry and further elaborating on our heroine's past. There's the ace reporter and ultimate ladies man Luca, who believes that Bayo is responsible for the death of his father over 20 years ago. Fucking time travel gets involved with this little girl named Cereza, who happens to just not be some random girl, but rather Bayonetta's younger self brought to the future to further the plans of the main villain, who, by the way, is also Bayonetta's father. There is a lot to keep track of, and I remember feeling extremely overwhelmed by this on my first playthrough, and I certainly wasn't alone on that front. It also doesn't help that the game doesn't exactly do the best job at easing the player into all of this. You're sort of just thrown right into the action and are expected to follow along. The first mission of the game literally spouts very important exposition at the player during gameplay, so forgive me if it's a little hard to keep track of. There's a lot of cutscenes in Bayonetta, more than you'd probably think there'd be for this kind of game, and I can't help but feel as though they're a little overindulgent with its own lore. This is something that the entire series is guilty of, but Platinum Games seems a little too interested in the world that they created, which would be fine, but this obsession bleeds into the storytelling quite a bit, and it ends up muddying the waters more than anything. Let's play the fun comparison game for a second. Devil May Cry 3 has about 90 minutes of cutscenes, while Bayonetta has roughly 2.5 hours of cinematics. Seems like a lot, huh? And you'd assume that the extra hour of time would mean that there's a lot more to Bayonetta's story than DMC 3's. In terms of how much actually happens, then yeah, but I'd argue that Bayonetta doesn't take full advantage of its longer runtime. DMC3 manages to tell a much more compelling story with tangible themes and character arcs in a significantly shorter amount of time than Bayonetta does. What also helps is that the cutscenes in DMC3 are all these beautifully animated spectacles that don't overstay their welcome. The same cannot be said about Bayonetta, unfortunately. While the game does feature quite a few bombastic fight scenes with some pretty stellar choreography, there's a large number of cutscenes that are comprised of character stills spouting dialogue at each other. Yeah, it's pretty easy to tell which cutscenes were the ones that got most of the budget and which ones got the table scraps. For as high production as most of the game is, this part of the presentation always stuck out as a noticeable blemish. At the very least, all of these lesser scenes are voiced, so props to that. I just find that the inclusion of these at all as a sign that maybe the amount of cutscenes should have been cut down a little bit. Not only would this tighten up the narrative from a pacing perspective, but it also would have resulted in a much more consistent visual experience. As much as I like them, maybe some of the cutscene battles should have been dropped in favor of putting more budget towards some of the quieter scenes. Because with the way things are now, the scene where Bayonetta gets her ass grabbed currently has more priority than the ones that are meant to assist her character growth. Damn, real classy, guys. Bayonetta's story sort of feels all over the place. However, this comes from having too much ambition more than anything. The story of Bayonetta tries to have it all. It's a story about romance, action, adventure, comedy, and even time travel. There's a lot of meat to this world, and you can tell that Hideki Kamiya really wanted players to get invested in it. You can find hidden documents scattered all over the game that cover the history of the universe in much more detail than even the main story does. What's especially cool is that they're written from the perspective of Luca's father before he was killed. The issue with the story isn't just that there's too much going on, it's that most of the ideas present aren't fleshed out to their fullest potential. Let's take Baldur for example. He's the main antagonist of the story, and is meant to serve as the ultimate test for Bayonetta as a character. He brainwashed her best friend, was responsible for the death of Luca's father, and now wants to collect the Eye of Darkness to carry out the plans of the Lumen Sages. Baldur is introduced in one cutscene on the second to last mission, and you fight him almost immediately after without any build-up. For as simplistic as a story as Devil May Cry 1 is, even that game at least built up its antagonists throughout the game. Bayonetta just sort of drops the bother stuff on us at the last second and expects us to care. Why didn't this get a larger focus in the story? That's her dad, and it would have made for some much needed personal stakes within the story. You know, give us a reason to care about Bayonetta aside from her just being a cool badass hero. I do like her as a character at least. She's the ultimate femme fatale, a badass witch that fully embraces her feminine side, outwardly flirtatious but is just as easily able to clear out a room of some of the most dangerous angels like it was nothing. If Dante was the ultimate power fantasy for men, then Bayonetta is meant to be the same but for women. It's hard to find many characters in the action game genre that bring the same energy as Bayonetta, which makes her a refreshing lead for this kind of game. Her characterization flourishes in the gameplay and in most of the cutscenes. Her antics are easily the best part about the game's narrative, but it's not enough to make me fully invested in what's going on. I know it might sound a little silly to spend this much time on the narrative of this kind of game, but I don't really think it's entirely fair to skip over it. Clearly, Platinum wanted the players to engage with the story on some front. You don't just put over 2 hours of cutscenes and pages upon pages of lore into your game if you don't want people to care. I can tell there was a lot of passion behind the world design and aesthetic of Bayonetta, so it's a shame that I don't really find myself caring about what's going on beyond that. I would have liked for there to have been some more thematic meat for me to chew on. There's a very loose theme of motherhood going on with the young Cereza and Bayonetta, but it's not really explored to the extent that it could have been. And that's the best way I can surmise the story of Bayonetta 1. There's a lot of ideas here, arguably too much. While this does make for some interesting world building if you really look for it, as a story, it doesn't really do much for me, sorry. But whatever, the story of these games don't really matter after the first playthrough anyways. The main appeal for Bayonetta lies in the game's combat system. So, how well does it stack up? Yeah, it's pretty good. Bayonetta has a lot of mechanics that you should be familiar with if you've played these kind of action games before. Multiple weapon types, pause combos, taunting, enemy step, the works really. If you've played Devil May Cry, then you should be able to quickly become accustomed to the basics of Bayonetta. Though this is only a loose comparison because the devil is in the details. Firstly, rather than attacks being based on button combinations, Bayonetta instead uses a more traditional punch and kick input system. Different combo inputs will result in a variety of effects on the enemies. For example, punch kick punch will throw enemies away from you, while 2 punches, a kick, followed by 1 more punch will launch them into the air. While the combo list might look a little overwhelming at first, it's something that can easily be committed to memory. Combo completion is super important in Bayonetta, since every single one of them will end in a Wicked Weave, a super powerful attack that has a chance of damaging multiple enemies. Line it up just right and you can catch a number of angels off guard with it. The type of Wicked Weave you'll get depends on both the combo you perform as well as the currently equipped weapons. The standard 3-hit combo using the default Scarborough Fair is significantly different than the one you get from using the katana or the rocket launchers. While Wicked Weaves are a staple mechanic of this game, it's not what the Bayonetta series is most recognized for. One of the most defining features of Bayonetta is the Witch Time system. By dodging an enemy just before their attack connects, time will momentarily slow to a crawl, which gives you a chance to completely wail on any angel in your path. Witch Time is a sick mechanic. It's got that classic risk-reward feel to it. It encourages players to really push their luck and bait out enemy attacks, and the way the game slows down slightly just before Witch Time pops off never gets old. That small window where the game lets you catch your breath adds an extra layer of emphasis that we wouldn't have gotten if the mechanic was instant. People often cite Witch Time as the game's sole defining mechanic, and I don't really blame them for that. It's by far the most flashy system for you to use, and the game goes out of its way to teach it to you as soon as you boot the thing up. From a casual standpoint, yeah, it's the most important mechanic in the game. However, if you really decide to sink your teeth into Bayonetta's design, you'll quickly find that Witch Time is actually complementary to another feature entirely. A mechanic unique to the Bayonetta series is the ability to prolong every attack in a combo by holding down the button. This allows you to rack up some pretty serious damage on the longer strings. However, the true utility of this feature is in dodge offset. While you're prolonging an attack, if you keep the button held down and dodge an enemy, you can actually continue your combo from where you left off. This technique is a complete game changer. Enemies in Bayonetta are hyper aggressive, so you might first assume that you should only be going for the shorter combos if you don't have witch time. However, dodge offset makes every combo viable in nearly every scenario. You can begin a combo, then halfway through, evade an enemy attack and trigger witch time. Hell, you can even use dodge offset to quickly reposition Bayonetta, so you can catch more enemies in the end combo Wicked Weaves. There's a lot of flexibility with dodge offset, and it's by far the most important mechanic in the game. It transforms Bayonetta from a standard action game into one about positioning, skillful reaction times, and forethought with its mechanics. Sure, it might be a little weird to get used to the general motion of dodge offset, but after a little practice, it should just get ingrained into your muscle memory rather quickly. You know, for how important dodge offset is to the general flow of Bayonetta's gameplay, I'm honestly shocked that there's no dedicated tutorial for it. I'm serious, you boot the game up and in the first mission you're taught how to punch, kick, shoot, and dodge, and also witch time by extension. From then on, it's left up to the player to figure out how everything else works. I don't have a problem with this in theory, because stuff like jump canceling and the application of taunts is something that players are easily going to discover on their own, but I'm not sure the same thing can be said about dodge offset. While you are taught about prolonged combo inputs right away, the actual technique of dodge offset is tucked away in a menu that not a whole lot of people are gonna check. It also doesn't help that this mechanic requires a bit more dexterity out of the player to get down compared to something like jump canceling, which just takes a single button press. I think having this mechanic being properly conveyed to the player early on would be a great idea, as it helps newcomers grasp on how you're supposed to play this game at higher levels. With the way things are now, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a large chunk of players that have no idea that this mechanic even exists. In most of the videos I've seen covering this game, dodge offset almost goes completely ignored, which is a bit strange considering how useful the mechanic is. I'm not insulting their skill level or anything, or saying that they're playing the game wrong, I'm just pointing out this fact as I find it very interesting. There's a lot that can be said about game design and the necessity of tutorials. Modern games are obsessed with cramming as much information as possible into the game itself, as to not confuse any potential newcomers. Video games are more popular than they've ever been. On top of the latest releases easily raking in millions upon millions of dollars, video games are basically ingrained into our modern internet culture. There are people out there that have entire careers built around playing them for an audience. And if you're really cool, then you make multi-hour long video essays talking about the fucking jump button or whatever. The point is, video games are officially ingrained into mainstream culture. So devs feel as though it's necessary to spoon-feed every bit of information about how to play and progress to the player. What this results in are games with a lot of hand-holding and tutorials. Bayonetta came out around the time when tutorials for games really started to get out of hand, and in the case of this game, I think they're used appropriately for the most part, but it's not perfect. For example, I don't think a mechanic like witch time needs a tutorial, because it's something that most players will be able to discover on their own just fine. It's a very intuitive mechanic. Dodging on its own is very important, and witch time already provides enough feedback to immediately understand why it happens. The same cannot be said about dodge offset. It's too abstract of an idea for players to figure out on their own without a bunch of time spent experimenting. The information for how to perform this action does exist, but it's a little too out of the way for what's supposed to be the game's main mechanic. I guess the somewhat obscure nature of the mechanic does add a certain amount of allure to it. Dodge offset comes off as a hidden trick that you can find and tell your friends about. You know, it gives the game a sense of community, and is just another avenue for more advanced players to show off their skills. I know whenever I watch someone start using prolonged gun inputs, that's how I know they know what's up. The point I'm trying to make with all this is that I'm sick of watching reviews of this game where people gas up witch time as the series' one and only mechanic. The core appeal of Bayonetta's combat comes from the combination of witch time, wicked weaves, and dodge offset. All three of these systems work in tandem with each other to create a loop that no other action game on the market offered at the time. Battles turn into an elegant dance of weaving in and out of danger, really pushing your luck to try to get the most out of attacks. In a way, Bayonetta is a dodging game first and foremost. Offense is very important, but the defensive play is treated with a lot more value than something like DMC, which has defensive mechanics of its own, but only exists as a singular option rather than being a staple part of your moveset. In Bayonetta, not only is it a core part of battle, but you're rewarded for going prolonged periods without taking hits. As you deal damage, you fill up this magic bar, and with each full row filled, you can execute a torture attack that deals massive damage to a single enemy. You can even spend portions of your magic meter on instant Wicked Weave attacks or other specialized skills. Big fan of this uppercut move right here. It never gets old for me. The catch with the magic meter is that you actually lose some upon taking a hit. A lot of people find this aspect of Bayonetta 1 to be rather frustrating, but I actually find this to be a good choice. I view the magic meter less as a punishment for doing badly, but rather a reward for doing well. Skillful players are able to fully take advantage of all the abilities they have at their disposal. Magic attacks are a pretty powerful tool, so having them take some work and skill to execute is a fair way to balance it out. As you play the game and get better at reading and avoiding enemies, you're rewarded with even more tools to play around with. This gives the player a much better sense of accomplishment, compared to always letting them keep the powerful moves regardless of how well they're playing. I think it also helps us embody Bayonetta more as a character in the gameplay. Bayonetta is a character that's easily able to take out the trash angels, and all of the cutscenes that show her fighting the common fodder, she does it without breaking a sweat. So when you take control of her in the gameplay, you don't want to ruin her street cred, right? You don't want the badass Angel Slayer to look like a chump, do you? So no better way to encourage this than to reward the player for not getting hit. But we need to ask the obvious question. Since Bayonetta wants to reward players for flawless play, does that mean every potential source of damage is fair and balanced? I'll get back to this one in a second, since it ties into another pretty major part about the game's design. For now, I just want to wrap up this combat discussion by talking about some of the game's customization. Bayonetta has a decent handful of weapons for you to use, and you can switch between 2 weapon sets at the press of a button. What's also cool is that certain weapons can be attached to your feet as well as your hands, giving you some extra freedom to mix and match your favorite combinations, though you do have to purchase the ability to do so. The weapons you have access to range from the standard action game equipment to some pretty unique ones. I'll be honest, I find a lot of the weapons in this game to be a bit of a mixed bag. I like the katana a lot, even though it's pretty standard. The rocket launchers are slow but pack one hell of a punch. Oh, and the whip is awesome. That rodeo attack you can do when you grab an enemy just fucks up the entire room. One of the best attacks in the game if you were to ask me. Then there's the ones that feel a little too situational or I just didn't get the appeal of. The shotguns, for instance. They're a little too similar to the default handguns. The claws are neat, but their elemental affinities don't feel all that impactful. And the Ice Skate's abilities to freeze enemies doesn't feel as impactful as it should. It also doesn't help that they can only be equipped to your feet. Come on, have Bayonetta do handstands while skating around, you cowards. I tend to stick to a pretty rigid set of weapons whenever I play this game, and that's fine. We all end up developing our favorites after all. But what I don't like about Bayonetta is its 2 weapon slot limit. For how much you're able to mix and match in this game, having only 2 slots to do so is a limitation I'd rather go without. Especially because I always feel compelled to dedicate 1 slot to the default handguns, because of how they're always applicable in nearly every encounter. My usual loadout consists of the default Scarborough Fair, with another slot being taken up by the whip and rocket launchers, only occasionally subbing out the whip for the katana. You can also get accessories for Bayonetta that helps change up the way you play the game, but I'll be honest, I don't really mess around with this system all too much. There is some pretty cool accessories here, like one that gives you a parry, and another that leaves bombs behind instead of activating Witch Time, but I'm the kind of person that leaves the game at the stock setting. It also doesn't help that some of these items are fucking expensive. At least 100,000 halos per accessory, and considering how situational some of their applications are, I'd end up just using the money to buy new techniques or health upgrades. The option is there for those who want it, but I never saw the appeal. The core mechanics of Bayonetta are pretty good, and if we were just gonna judge the game solely off of those mechanics, then yeah, it would be an awesome game. Combat is slick, most of the weapons are fun, and playing as Bayonetta offers a game flow that you can't find anywhere else. However, there was always something about this game that kept me from loving it on the same level that a lot of people do. I enjoy Bayonetta's core mechanics a lot, but the design surrounding the foundation isn't the most sound, and the source of those feelings lie in one major component. The ranking system in Bayonetta is frustrating, so much so that the better I get at the game and try to engage with it, the less I end up enjoying it as a whole. That sounds like an extreme reaction, but just hear me out here for a second. The ranking system in Bayonetta is very harmless on the outside looking in. Every fight is graded on 3 categories. There's your combo score, the amount of time it took you to finish the verse, and finally how much damage you took, with the lowest rank being Stone and the highest one being Platinum. When the encounter ends, all 3 categories are averaged out and you're presented with your rank for that verse. At the end of the stage, all of the fights are then added together, and you're given your final rank for the stage. The best rank you can get in Bayonetta is the pure platinum medal. This requires you to get a platinum medal in every category. There's even a pure platinum trophy if you're good enough to do this for the entire stage. Ooh. Seems simple enough. You just gotta practice all of the fights on their own, and then with enough time and patience, you should be well on your way. It was this line of thinking that sent me down a rabbit hole back when I first started to take this game seriously, and I have never been the same since. So what's the big deal? What exactly makes this so aggravating, and why would you want to do it? Well, on top of a ranking system existing to tie all of the mechanics together, there are some reasons you'd want to shoot for a good rank. You accumulate more halos for upgrades depending on the rank you finish the stage with, and if you want to get all of the game's unlockables, then you need to get at least a platinum trophy on every chapter on a selected difficulty. Pure platinums are something that you do exclusively for bragging rights. But because the game goes out of its way to present itself as something that can be perfected, it creates a silent expectation that you really should always be going for platinum medals. If you want to get the best ranks in Bayonetta, then you need to play it in a very specific way, which I find to be antithetical to the game's overall attitude. You're given all these tools to mess around with, but you can't spend too much time experimenting or using an unconventional setup, because it could lead to an impact on the kind of rank you get for that fight, which could potentially diminish your overall score. I'm not too big of a fan of having each fight graded on such a strict system for a couple of reasons. Firstly, not every verse is created equal. Some of them are these multi-wave battles where you're expected to clear them out with efficiency, waste no time showing off or experimenting, while also making sure your combo stays unbroken. But be sure to remember to use specific attacks, because even if you don't drop your combo, there's still a chance you won't get the platinum ranking. Other times you'll run into a fight that has a couple of enemies that die in like 3 hits and you get an easy pure platinum without much work. One that has just as much influence on your overall rank as some of the tougher battles. Not every fight is designed equally, but all of them have the same amount of influence on your report card. Secondly, there are the missable verses. Oh yes, I'm being serious. Sometimes when you finish a stage, you might notice that there are some medals missing. This is because you didn't quite do everything. Every stage has battles that could be completely skipped over, and your only indication of this is if you pay close attention to the order of verses that you've done. Sometimes after finishing one fight, you need to suddenly backtrack to an earlier area without any indication to do so, just so you can snag more medals. Or worse, break some random object in the stage to spawn the fight. This feels pretty arbitrary to me. Like, what's stopping them from placing these fights just further along the stage? Sometimes you'll cross a point of no return only to find out after a fact that you did indeed miss a fight. But I'd still rather take these over the Alfheims. God, these things are awful. Alfheims are Bayonetta's equivalent to secret missions. These are specialized fights that test you on certain skills, like defeating the enemies in a limited number of attacks, disabling witch time, and other specific conditions. The thing about Alfheims is that they aren't bad on their own. Rather, it's when they're factored into your overall ranking is when I take issue with it, because yes, they do matter. Regardless of the challenge, Alfheims are required if you want to get the best rank in the stage, which is total bullshit. These encounters don't play the same as regular fights, but you still have to do them every time you replay a stage if you want to get that pure platinum. Why is my ability to stay in the air for 30 seconds ranked on the same scale as killing enemies in a hyper-specific way? Why is the space shooter section rated the same as the core combat? Bayonetta is a game with a lot of flashy set pieces to it, and on a first time playthrough, these can be a fun change of pace. Barreling down the highway on a motorbike, activating witch time to just narrowly dodge the traffic is cool as hell. But if you care about getting a good rank, then these fun diversions go from being a nice shakeup to the bane of my existence. Fuck Route 666, worst stage in the game. It starts off with 2 combat sections that are already kind of hard to get a pure platinum on, then it's followed by a vehicle section that you can't afford to get hit on at all. By the way, make sure you're driving fast enough and you shoot enough guys, or else you have to do the entire stage all over again. Don't even get me started on the space shooter section at the start of chapter 11. This bullet hell is over 10 minutes long, and if you get hit once, then your pure platinum medal just went down the drain. Who thought this was a good idea? I know that some of you are about to say that it's my fault for caring too much. I get it, you don't have to get a pure platinum. No one is forcing me to. And I'm also not going to sit here and cry that it's too hard. Getting the best rank in an action game should provide some modicum of challenge. If it was too easy, then it wouldn't be fun, right? But the issue with Bayonetta's ranking system isn't that it's too hard, it's that it demands perfection while also having some pretty questionable design of its own. Like I said, the game is packed to the brim with a bunch of gimmicky fights and set pieces that are judged on the same scale as any other standard battle. The actual ranking system itself is fairly strict and doesn't offer the flexibility that most other games in the genre do. If you want to get the best rank in Bayonetta, you can't afford to experiment or waste any time messing around. If you want to get that no damage platinum medal, then you need to treat this game like a bullet hell, because any attack that connects will instantly knock that category down to a gold, or even lower, whether that be an obviously telegraphed attack, a lightning fast kick from Jean, or an attack that comes out as soon as a cutscene ends. All of it weighs the same amount on your rank. That last one in particular can go fuck itself. This kind of stuff is all over the game, so I often find myself mashing the dodge button as soon as the cutscene ends. Regardless of all of that, I tried to go for as many pure platinum trophies as I could for this video. I knew that I had an unpopular opinion, so I wanted to try to master this game in hopes that it would improve my view. I managed to do it on the first 4 chapters after a few hours of attempts, and chapter 5 was going smoothly too. I made sure to go out of my way to tackle every hidden fight in Alfheim, clearing them out as fast as I could while also making sure to rack up the combo meter. Everything was going just fine until I made it to the end of the stage, then this happened. I fell off the stage during a set piece, and I was instantly killed. And because of that death, my entire pure platinum run was ruined. I decided to finish the stage anyway to see what would happen, only to be greeted by a gold trophy and a fight that I accidentally skipped over. I was given a gold trophy all because I died to something completely outside of the game's combat. This is the reason why I do not care about the ranking system in this game. Bayonetta 1 is a game that lures you in with the temptations of it being something that can be mastered, only to brutally crush those ambitions because its desire to be a fun adventure with plenty of spectacle clashes heavily with its want to be this major test of skill. I just know I'm inviting a bunch of nerds to leave comments saying how they pure platinum the game on the hardest difficulty using only the handguns. The ranking system is just fine. And if you had a good time doing it, then that's fine. But for me, I just don't think it's fun trying to perfect this game. Why would I even bother to if I'm not having a good time? Whenever I replay Bayonetta, I do so in a very specific way. I don't even bother trying to go for all the optional battles, and I tend to skip around on the mission select screen. I play around with weapons the way I want to, and only sometimes will I really try to go for a pure platinum. I try to not care about the rankings, and it allows me to have more fun with this game than I otherwise would have. It's just a shame that whenever I finish a chapter, I'm always given a reminder that I'm not playing the game the way I'm supposed to. And if that isn't demoralizing, then I don't know what is. However, even with all of that considered, I'd still say that my enjoyment of Bayonetta outweighs any of the missteps it might have. The original Bayonetta is a groundbreaking title in the action genre, and it still manages to shine over a decade after its original release. Yeah, it's got some problems. Some questionable design rears its ugly head every once in a while, but when Bayonetta is good, it's damn good. The presentation is god tier, with a visual design that was not only striking for the time, but still holds up to this day. The mechanics are legendary. There are plenty of ways to mess around in the combat system, ranging from a wide variety of attacks and weapons. Expression is a large part of the action genre, and Bayonetta offers so many different avenues to achieve this. I know I critique the game a lot, but at the end of the day, I still enjoy the hell out of it. I've put over 75 hours into the Steam version alone, and you don't just do that for something you hate, right? I like this game a lot, it's just that there are some awkward blemishes here that keep me from fully loving it. Though, for some people, it's those design choices that made this game truly click with them. It's easy to forget that Bayonetta 1 is the first game in the series because of how polished it is. Bayonetta herself became an icon in the genre, and the popularity of her character arguably eclipsed the game she came from. That should speak volumes as to how much of an impact this game left on the medium. Bayonetta is a roller coaster of an experience. It's an adventure that's full of many highs and lows that sometimes test my patience a little too much. No matter how exhausted I end up feeling by the end of it, I always find myself eager to hop back on this ride every once in a while. But as we all know, this was only the start of the witch hunts, and while those later games would attempt to expand and refine the franchise, the original will always have a place in my heart for what it represents, which I guess is what's most important at the end of the day. Hey everyone, thank you all so much for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to all of my channel supporters whose names are on screen now. It's because of these legends that I'm able to make videos at the pace I do currently. People tend to underestimate just how much of an impact viewer support has on a creator, and I appreciate every single one of these people for having faith in me and enjoying what I do to this extent. I seriously cannot thank you all enough for this opportunity, and I'll continue to try my hardest to earn your support. This Bayonetta video is one that I've been wanting to make for a very long time, but just never got around to doing so. I remember saying that it was something that I wanted to cover last year, but I just didn't have the time to fit it into my schedule. Hopefully this video will do well enough to justify making more like it. I know that DMC is pretty popular on this channel, so who knows, maybe Bayonetta will also be an ongoing franchise to talk about alongside it. In terms of future projects, the next main video is probably going to be on Persona 3 Reload. That game is dangerously close to coming out, and I know when it releases, it's going to be my main priority. I have a feeling that there's gonna be a lot of talk about regarding that one, so it'll probably take me a while to get it out. Maybe I'll have some time to crank out some smaller videos in between it, but only time will tell. If you want to stay up to date with all of that and other upcoming videos, please consider following my Twitter or joining my Discord server. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.